meeting... Start again. I advise you lot, not me. Good morning and welcome to the meeting of the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee. My name is Councillor John Taylor, I chair the committee. I'd like to welcome anybody who's watching and welcome members and officers who are here today. I will just go round the committee and ask people to introduce themselves, and to officers, when you come forward to speak on one of your agenda items, if you could introduce yourselves as well. So I'll start to my right.
Yes, I'm Councillor Caroline Hope from the Gomersall and Liversedge ward.
And I'm Councillor Angela Sewell from the Gurkha ward.
Yeah, I'm Councillor James Homewood from Ashbrow ward.
I'm Nick Booth, independent member.
Morning, Andy North, independent member.
Harry McCarthy, councillor for Conn Valley.
Kath Bennett, councillor Cleckheaton.
Councillor Nosheen Dad, ex officio portfolio holder for adult social care and corporate.
Councillor Graham Turner, cabinet member for finance, regeneration, economic growth.
Thank you, members. As I say, I'll ask officers when they speak if they wouldn't mind introducing themselves. The second... have we had any apologies?
None received.
Okay. So now the minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of September have been circulated. Are members happy with those minutes? Okay. Declarations of interest. So just to remind members, if they do have an interest to declare, please can they say so now? If, as we go through the meeting, it comes up and you realise that you do have an interest to declare, please do so. And if you do, can you send an email to Nicola at the end, just confirming the details of that interest that you've reported. Admissions of the public. So this meeting will be held in public. So item 5, deputation petitions.
None received, Chair.
And item 6, public question time.
None received, Chair.
Okay, so item 7, screen's frozen. So we're on to corporate customer standards report. I think, Chris, you're going to come and share this with us.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Chris Reid, Corporate Customer Standards Officer. So this time I've got an annual report which I report every year to Corporate Governance and Audit Committee, and it's in two parts this year. So there's the review of 24-25 and also a little bit of a discussion about the Ombudsman's Complaints Code, which is coming in April 26. So the review of 24-25, on the first page there's some overall totals. They're quite hard to interpret because it's difficult to compare like with like, but I think the notable figure out of that is the increase in numbers for housing service, housing complaints, which went to the Housing Ombudsman, and the number they dealt with went up from 190 to 250 in the year. They think that it's because more situations are being reviewed formally, and also when complaints are coming in, they actually are identifying them more readily and putting them through the process. So the numbers going up. I mention it because I think it's an indication that when we move into the housing local government ombudsman, that we will see an increase in the numbers going through. So next year we might well find a difference in terms of the numbers being received, or numbers being recorded, I should say. So in terms of the actual sort of year's performance, third stage and ombudsman results are pretty consistent with previous years. There has been a slight increase in complaints as suggested in last year's update to Corporate Governance and Audit Committee. But overall, we receive fewer ombudsman complaints than might be anticipated by our population in West Yorkshire, for example. It seems as though we we basically deliver a solid sort of top half council performance. So we're not sort of complete stars, but we are performing reasonably well in Kirklees. Don't want to sort of be too complacent with that, because obviously each individual complaint has an issue and a story behind it. But generally, in general terms, that seems to be our sort of general position in the world. We didn't get any formal complaints that went to formal report with the Ombudsman, and again we received an lower than average number of upheld complaints from the Ombudsman as well than we might expect. The areas of learning and the pinch points are principally, as we've reported previously. There are no surprises really in the sort of findings and outcomes from learning, which is probably what you expect. And it's a positive, because if there is a sort of crucial learning point or something, it should have really been picked up at the service complaint stage or prior to that, rather than it come to me to sort of determine. So I kind of see that as a positive, an indication that the process is working okay. So moving on to the Ombudsman's I just mentioned whistleblowing. That's just seen a return to the higher numbers that we had pre-COVID. It went down quite a lot, and I think it was largely because officers were home working, and now officers are more in the office. I think the numbers have returned basically to the numbers they were pre-COVID. So again, that's fairly sort of consistent. Moving on to the Ombudsman's Code, that's coming in April 2026. So we're looking to move to a two-stage complaints process in January, and then we're hoping for 3 months for it to bed in before we actually move into the Ombudsman's Code, which comes in April 26. So the two-stage complaints process is not a huge change in itself, because I think our initial complaints process, our current stage one, really is a forming sort of stage where we explain why we've reached the decision that we have, and the customer from there perhaps will sort of either decide that we've made some sort of error, or will accept and understand a bit more about why the decision is what the decision is. So I think that discussion will continue to be had. It just won't be part of the complaints process. So a stage one complaint will be the service, a formal service response, and the stage two will be the corporate complaint response. So as it is now broadly. So we have looked around at other councils who are perhaps a little bit ahead of us, and some councils have been operating a two-stage complaints process for quite some years. We do expect recording timescales for response to be perhaps a little bit tricky. It's something that services might or might not have done, but collating those corporately might be a bit of a pinch point for us. Again, in-service acknowledgements of complaints, giving timescales for response, that's always an issue in services that are under pressure. So if you are busy, then one of the first things that sort of goes by the by is the acknowledgement sort of process. It's quite easy for that to get sort of missed, and struggling with that. So we can sort of perceive that we're perhaps not always going to get all the acknowledgements out. Hitting deadlines are always an issue, but it has to be said that the Ombudsman are not expecting 100% compliance. They did when I went to a session with them. They were talking about a 70% acceptance rate of complaints going through, and I think, to be fair, we are sort of at that level. I know in terms of corporate complaints at third stage, new second stage, we're at 85% for last year. So again, we comfortably meet those sort of targets. And as I've suggested right at the beginning of this conversation, an increase in the number of corporate reviews will come through. So to move forward between sort of January and March, we're going to be looking at adapting the database that Homes and Neighbourhood use for the Housing Ombudsman complaint, because the Housing Ombudsman's Code broadly mirrors the Local Government Ombudsman's Code. So the database they have to record complaints will be something that we can use corporately. So we'll be pursuing that. We're looking also at the letters template that housing use, because again, the code does sort of expect that you give a little summary of the complaint and process where to go if the customer remains dissatisfied. So again, we'll try and make that so there's a formal sort of template for that to go through. And just sort of nudging services towards compliance. I very much see 26-27 as something of a practice year, and again, the local government ombudsman has suggested that's how they will consider it. They'll give a little bit of leeway for councils, and obviously we're aiming to meet the Ombudsman's Code, and I think we'll be a lot better at the end of the year than we are at the beginning of the year as we get used to it. So I do intend to report back to Corporate Governance and Audit around April time, just to let you know how we're going and what we're doing. So that's really it. So thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I'll open that up to members. Yep, Andy.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting report because it's a really good barometer, isn't it? The number of complaints across the services that the council provides as to where we are in terms of service delivery for the community. I suppose my experience is more outside of local government, so I'm more used to seeing performance reports around KPIs. You know, how are we doing against our sort of target performance across a number of, you know, different areas, rather than just looking at complaints. So the first question was really around that, you know, how do we look at the sort of broader performance? Because I saw that obviously this is covering a lot of services, but not every strategic priority for the council. I mean, climate change, things like that, you know, that's not looked at here. So just interested on how the council looks at those areas as well. And I did have one specific question, which I'll come on to in a minute.
Okay. Well, the Ombudsman's Code does have KPIs which we will be reporting on an annual basis. They're very much around the acknowledgements and the timescales for complaint response, then also outcomes and percentage upheld. So we'll be able to measure all that between services and different councils, I suppose, you know, as we move forward. So we'll get a greater amount of detail as we move forward, which we can use for comparison. So the comparables that I use at the moment are fairly sort of broad. I look at the Ombudsman's decisions and sort of tally them up, basically, to get our place in the world. So it'll be interesting just to get a lot more detail there. I mean, obviously, this is focused largely on complaints. So in terms of, I suppose the other thing to say is that at the moment we don't count the service complaints, whereas we will be required to count service complaints individually as part of our tallies. So we will start picking up more sort of individual service information that I don't currently report on. Yeah.
Just before bringing you in, Andy, Rachel indicated she wanted to add something.
Yeah, it was just to clarify. So we have a quarterly performance report which has multiple KPIs from across the council, and that goes to Cabinet quarterly, and then that also goes to scrutiny, because performance is a scrutiny function rather than an audit committee function. But you can certainly find all those reports online.
I thought there must be somewhere. No, it's really comforting to hear, thank you. And so the other question was just about the housing ombudsman figures. They just seem to have leapt up from the previous year, 8 to 49. So I was just wondering if you could provide a bit more information on that. You know, what are the reasons behind it? There was some mention of severe maladministration cases. So I thought it'd be interesting to hear specifically on that. Thank you.
Again, they are actually sort of reported separately. So we're in the process of, I suppose, working more closely together. But at the moment, it is kind of quite separate in terms that they have a team that deal with stuff. I am aware, certainly, that, as I say, it's largely because we are now more aware of things. They did a big program of training within their service as well to sort of identify complaints and push things through formally so they're properly recorded. So I don't think that it's a deteriorating service. I think it's more that they are now all collated in one place. So that it's getting reported in a far better way. And again, I suspect that when we move into local government ombudsman's code, we'll probably find a similar change like that. Yeah.
I'm going to bring James in a second, but just to comment on that last discussion. So I sit on the Housing Improvement Board as well, and we see all of that coming through there, and there's been an awful lot of work and effort put in place in terms of improving that process. There's also been changes in the software that they use as well, which is making it easier to sort of record those complaints. And obviously everybody will be aware of the big issues that are affecting social housing at the moment, or have been affecting social housing, from Grenfell through to Awab. Is it Awab? the young lad that was killed in Rochdale and the impact of mould and condensation. And sadly, what we've also seen is the ambulance chasers going round trying to get people to put in formal complaints because they think they can get some compensation. So you're seeing an element of that as well, Andy. But I'll bring James in now, if I may.
It's helpful, thank you.
Yeah, it was just, so I probably asked a similar question before and just forgotten the answers to these, but in terms of the new two-stage process, so at stage 1, I'm just trying to think of like what controls are in place. So does each area of the council manage their own complaints? Do they all use the same recording system? And is there a view on for each area how they have to manage them? So for example, if I'm a housing officer and I get a housing complaint, do I just manage that complaint myself, or does it have to go to somebody of a specific seniority or whose role is specifically to respond to those complaints? I'm just trying to understand like how they're managed and what controls are in place.
Yeah, thank you. We don't have a sort of council-wide CRM system or anything like that at the moment, so that is a challenge for us in terms of how we're going to count. But what I find is that services do tend, or those services with a lot of complaints tend to have their own management system. So we should be able to tally them together. But what we're hoping to do is to bring in a complaints system which will enable those services that don't currently have a sort of counting system to be able to count them, so that there is a sort of an option for them to do that. So it is a little bit piecemeal, I suppose, rather than it be a sort of one-all CRM system, which would be an ideal. But we will have to see how that grows and develops, and if it turns out that we're not recording what we should do, then obviously that's a discussion that we're going to have at some point in future and see whether we need a corporate system to do that. So it is a sort of, as I say, I very much see 26-27 as a bit of a trial year to see how it goes and how we develop. In terms of complaint response, we obviously you get a whole range of complaints. Some things perhaps are around the customer not understanding the process, or sometimes actually they challenge the process, and it does make a senior manager have pause for thought and think, actually, are we doing it right? Have we always done it wrong? You know, are there things that we can learn from this? So we tend to have it horses for courses. I do expect a senior manager to have oversight of a complaint at stage 2, which is the service complaint, and that will continue, but we don't specify that it all has to be signed off by a individual. You know, we don't have a complaints officer particularly within each service, but we do expect it to be somebody that's reasonably senior and reasonably appropriate to comment, and we pick that up on review. So if at corporate review we find that perhaps a service hasn't dealt with it reasonably, then we would make comment upon that. So we do sort of monitor it that way.
I'm just going to let James come back in, then Nick, then Kath.
Yeah, just quickly, thanks for that. I mean, I think obviously there's a cost-benefit ratio there, but I think the complaint system would be useful, because I think also when you're talking about timescales, a lot easier for you to manage that if you know when someone logged that complaint, when it came in, what had happened, and also all the information's in one place, isn't it, for a second line? So if you've got all of your responses and commentary there, that's going to be easier to manage in those timescales and more consistent. I would think so. If we can do that, I think that would be very, very useful. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it is a balance. I mean, what you've got to remember as well, though, and I think you've said it right at the beginning of this, is that each service has their own core system, and it's a system that sits on top. So you do have an element of double entry, you know, so it's working out whether that cost of doing that is better than the benefit of, you know, or worse than the benefit of the outcomes of it. But yeah, you are quite right. If it's all in one place, it can all be managed in one place a lot easier. So yeah, this is part of where we'll be looking through the year just to sort of see what sort of figures we're getting and whether it's being managed appropriately. So yeah, that's a good point.
Nick?
Yeah, hi. Just looking at the section in your report that talks about apology letters and a small symbolic amount of compensation. Do we monitor how many of those we pay out and the total amount and track that over time? Because I'm just thinking that one way of reducing the number of complaints that flow through into the tables will be to throw money at the problem, and want to make sure we're not just throwing money at the problem to try and get the numbers down. So yeah, the total quantum would be interesting over time.
We don't tend to at the moment, but the numbers that we're talking about aren't that high. I wouldn't want to give you a figure off the top of my head, but we don't routinely pay out monies to people. So, and what we do is the Ombudsman have actually a remedies guide. So when we look at stuff, we always reference it against the remedies guide. So we make sure that it's in line with what we feel the Ombudsman would offer. And the Ombudsman actually encourages us to do that sort of work, because obviously if we can resolve a complaint at the earliest possibility, earliest option, then obviously that's better customer service. We don't actually have a complete tally of it, but I could produce it quite easily. So if there was a service that came along and said, we're a bit worried about this, then I would be able to identify it for them. But I've not perceived that it's a real issue, because the numbers aren't very high at all, really. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Kath?
Yep, thanks very much. Following on, really, I think from what James has just been saying, it does. I mean, this report is very much in line with all the reports I've seen over the years, and so which is encouraging, really, that the level of dissatisfaction doesn't reach the levels at which people are determined to go to the Ombudsman and then get a recourse to their complaint. So, but I do think we ought to recognise that we don't, because of the high level of this report, we don't pick up any changes in general sort of dissatisfaction with services, because of the reason that has just been given, that those are dealt with at service level and they aren't collated for this report, which is a shame, I think, because there ought to be a place where we can pull all that together, not as as individual issues, but as a general trend. Because if my experience with, dare I say, council inquiries is anything to go by, the levels of frustration that I feel get to despairing stage. So, and if I'm feeling like that, trying to get answers to stuff which are fairly straightforward, then in general people will. And so that's one point. Then the next point is that there is frustration because there's lack of information that people feel they ought to be able to access online. And that's the first port of call, that any complaint, they're told, go online, which is, again, that's okay if people can access, as the vast majority can these days. But then the information needs to be put there, and often it is not. And that then leads to further frustration. So I do think we ought to think more carefully about not this high level stuff in this corporate report, but trying to collate all the evidence that we have about frustration, dissatisfaction, complaints unresolved, and how they're resolved or not, so that we get a better sense of how the council is performing in the eyes of those for whom the services are provided. Sometimes it's really difficult to get things right. I accept that, but I do think we ought to see what the extent of the issue is, and we don't, unfortunately. But this, we do get sort of some indications, like through the Housing Ombudsman, that things weren't right in housing, which are now being put right. So I'd just leave that there for you, Chair, to work out whether we ought to ask for a wider understanding of what's going on.
Yeah. I think actually that next year's results will give a lot more information about service complaint responses. So we will start to draw out exactly what you're looking for, I suspect. I do find in terms of general dissatisfaction, it tends to come with service change. So if you have a service change, for example, different bin rounds or something like that, then that increases the number of complaints. And so it does come in waves, and sort of high profile roadworks, for example, generates a lot of complaints and that sort of stuff. So you can, and legislation changes can all sort of just lead to sort of differences in how we deal with stuff, which means that we get a sort of surge of complaints in particular areas. So we do certainly pick up those sort of things. But in terms of learning, a lot of them are, well, I suppose it's around communication, which again is something that you've touched on in terms of letting people know that things are changing and that sort of stuff. So there's a potential there. And the other thing that we've got is, I'm not sure what the group is called now, but it was a sort of customer expectation group, which is kind of looking at how people are told about things and their expectations that are being set, and there's a separate sort of project on that. So again, I think that will probably assist, but I say I don't I don't know too much about it, so I can't comment too much about it, but yeah. Thank you,
I think Rachel just wants to add a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. Chris is right, we've got a customer expectations piece of work at the moment. I visited all the political groups last year to get feedback of some of the areas that they were, frustrated with, or areas that they were hearing from residents, and we came up with a list of 5 that we've been working on some focused improvements on, which is very much a mixture of trying to make the online experience easier, the information that you get from the online experience better, but also looking at where the failure demand is in some of those pathways, and looking at how we can use technology and other solutions to try and improve that. I'm revisiting the groups at the moment to see whether things have shifted in the year, and just to give an update on progress. But it's actually at scrutiny next week as part of the transformation portfolio, so they've got an opportunity to have a look at that as well.
Thank you, Chair. I think you touched upon this in your response to Councillor Homewood's question. But how confident are you that each service is an adequate system for, logging, tracking, monitoring, and resolving complaints? One of the things that I sit on the Government Regeneration Scrutiny Panel, and we looked at damp mould and condensation in council housing. One of the things came up with that until recently, there wasn't an adequate casework management tool for officers, which made it really difficult for them to manage their own caseloads, and had an impact as well upon the conditions that residents were living in. And secondly as well, you've already touched upon this, but how are complaints currently managed? Like, what tool is used, or is this kind of done, is it kept in your head, or is it like in a shared spreadsheet or something? So a bit of information on that would be useful. Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of confidence about the year, I think we will find out during the year, but I'm sure we'll have some issues and things to work through in terms of making sure that we really collect the stats that we need for the Ombudsman's Code. So I'm sure there will be a learning process to go through. I think we all acknowledge that. As I say, the services that tend to have a high volume of complaints have a more sophisticated sort of process for dealing with them. So, for example, revenues and benefits and council tax concerns, and I know they have a log database of complaints that go through, and in a sense, I suppose it's also those services that have more a wider range of issues that could become a complaint. Sort of like refuse collection. We get a lot of complaints, but actually there are only 4 or 5 things that it could be. It's quite limited in terms of actually what the complaint is. So that's sort of easier to manage in a sense than other services that perhaps it could be a whole wide range of stuff to look at. In terms of our database, we have a very old cranky access database which we're looking to update, but we do actually record the dates we get things in, the date we acknowledge, the date we respond, whether it's upheld, the reason for upheld, and the learnings. So we certainly have that on our database. And I know some other services have similar databases and things like that. So the replacement for that is the system that housing use and their complaints database. So obviously there is the option of transferring, and we intend to transfer our data onto that, and for other services to also transfer data onto that as well. So as we move over time, it will actually become more uniform, I suspect, as we go through. But yes, there is some work to do on that. You're quite right to point that out. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. I'm just going to come back on that last point because it's been bothering me throughout the discussion, really, that in your introduction you talked about adopting the housing complaints system, but then in every other answer you've given, it's been, well, different services do different things. Now, surely we should be having one system that all services are moving towards, and there ought to be a piece of work. It ought to be on somebody's agenda to make sure that that's happening, and I'm not getting any confidence that that is what's happening. What I'm hearing is different services do things differently. If they get a lot of complaints, they've probably got a system in place. If they don't, they probably haven't. And we expect things not to be perfect. Well, that doesn't give me the reassurance that I, as a committee chairman, need that we are in control of this. It suggests like we're winging it and we're just going to see what happens. Is the impression I'm getting from the answers that you've given. So for me, I'd like, and I'm not sure who, and I'm looking at Rachel, but I apologise, Rachel, but it all ends up with you anyway. So I'm looking for someone to tell me they're going to grasp this issue, take it away, and come back to us, and we'll ask for them to come back in a couple of months to tell us what action we're taking to make sure that we do put in place something that is consistent and that we're communicating that consistently across the entire council, so that all complaints, wherever they land with us, are being dealt with and captured in a similar manner. Because I'm not feeling that reassurance at the moment. I think Sam's picking this one up, are you, Sam?
Yes, I'm Samantha Lawton. I'm the Service Director for Legal Governance and Commissioning. And I agree, we do need some consistency corporately across the organisation. So I can definitely take that back away. We've already started that piece of work in terms of the rollout for the new Ombudsman Code. But we can come back and update you about what those controls are. But I will take that away as an action, Councillor Taylor.
Any idea of when? You might not want to commit now, but...
No, we'll look at the dates. Can we go away and have a look at where we're up to? But we can come back by the end of the year? By the end of... Well, not this year. Sorry, I'm thinking... I work on an...
Remarkably optimistic.
I'm here every meeting, so I can certainly...
Shall you and I agree a date after this?
We'll agree a date after this meeting.
If members are happy that I just sort a date out for them to come back with that. But thank you, Chris. And I think
I was just sort of, if I could add as well, I think one of the issues that we have is around making sure that services can change and develop and grow and sort of in the time that they need, really. I don't want to put too much upon them, which is why I've been quite cautious. So I'm sort of very keen to have the two-stage complaints process.
I kind of disagree with you, because if we have a code coming in from the Ombudsman, whether services like it or not, they have to adhere to it. So we have a deadline and they have to adhere to that, because we can't go back to the Ombudsman and say, well, we're just giving them more time to get ready. It doesn't work like that, Chris, I'm afraid.
Well, for the first year of the code, it is a development year. So I don't disagree with you. I'm not disagreeing, so I don't want to sort of get into an argument about it. But there is a little bit of time for us to do that. But yes, so I say it's treading a sort of a bit of a careful line in between making sure that we get something achievable and something done, and obviously giving the consistency that we're all looking for. So yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, and I've once again not done that, so I'll just repeat that. to note the report and the whistleblowing outcomes, along with noting the introduction of the Local Government Ombudsman Complaint Code. So we're happy to note that, and thank Chris for his report. Thank you. I'm going to move, you can escape now. I'm going to move on to agenda item 8, which I think, Ruth, are you? So if you'd like to come and join us. So Ruth, when you're ready, if you just introduce yourself and then. Oh, it's Sam. Joy.
No, that's absolutely fine. So I've already introduced myself. So I've brought this report here today to update committee members on the work that we've done on the contract management arrangements corporately. You will note from the report that this was a recommendation picked up by the auditors in their last BFM report. So we went away and we got some transformation report and we put together a contract management group and we identified 4 different work streams. The 4 different work streams are set out. Ruth can give you some more details around the contract management framework and the data element, but we picked those work streams because they linked in with the comments that were made in the VFM report, because there was comments around developing learning, there was comments around data, and putting in some kind of framework to add more resilience around contract management. So I'm not going to go into detail in the report, it just set out everything that we're doing. What I do want to say is this is very much a journey. I'm not sure we've reached our final destination, and I'm not sure we could tick to say it's complete. There is more work to be done. The work that is still to do is probably around a number of areas. The work on data is still ongoing, and Ruth will come in shortly to give you an update around that. So that piece of work is still ongoing. We need to embed the contract management framework and see how that's working and whether that is helpful to contract managers in the organisation and what we've introduced. The other aspect, I think, is people and skills. Because the contract management model that we've got is that contract management responsibility remains the responsibility of services across the directorate. So we've refreshed the governance to ensure that there's escalation and that issues can rise and everyone is clear where the responsibility lies and who is aware of that, and there's accountability within services. But I think there's more to do, because it's about looking whether we've got the right amount of contract managers. Are they in the right place? For some people, it's within their jobs. For others, it's a sole job. So that piece of the work is going to continue. I think there's also a need for our team's procurement. Now that we have the Procurement Act in, which is 2023, contract management is actually part of the procurement cycle, which has been for the first time under this new Act. So we are looking at, and I've been working with Ruth, and Ruth's doing some work to look around and see what resource do we need from a contract manager, from a corporate perspective in procurement? What role should that be? How does that work with the model that we have at the moment? So that piece of work we're going to scope that out, and that is ongoing. And I think member oversight as well is an area that still we are developing. Obviously, procurement and commissioning is an exec function. We will be reporting to Cabinet on any KPIs. We have the procurement strategy. We have KPIs in the procurement strategy. I think it's helpful today to seek the comments and experience of you as experienced audit members to have a look on what we've put in so far in terms of the framework, the process, and any gaps or opportunities that we need to pick up. But it's definitely coming here looking for feedback and comments on the work we've done so far and anything you think might be work that we still need to do. So that's it from me, but Ruth might want to talk a little bit more about the contract management framework. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ruth Calladine. I'm the Head of Procurement and Commissioning Support. So in terms of the framework, a lot of the work on developing this framework has been undertaken within my team. So what we have done is developed a tiering process for our procurement. So before we embark on a procurement process, we undertake a tiering process using a tool that we've developed based on best practice. So that's from like within the LGA, Crown Commercial Services, neighbouring authorities. So the tiering looks at risks in terms of contract value, state of the market, availability of suppliers, and how easy it would be to re-procure if something happened to the supplier, to ensure that there's continuity in place. So then the framework reflects this. So the tiering tool advises us if the contract is tiered as a bronze, silver or gold contract. So the gold contracts are the high value, high risk, business critical contracts to the council, which do require a higher level of contract management. So the framework has been set up to reflect that. And alongside the framework agreement, we've developed a suite of tools and guidance documents that are published on the intranet to support our contract managers in managing their contracts that we've never had before. So we're hoping that that's helpful to our contract managers, especially for people that are doing it on top of their day job, to give them support to carry out the role on top of everything else that they're doing. And then to further support contract managers, we've developed an online training package that's published on the My Learning portal that's available for anyone to access. And then we're also encouraging contract managers for silver and gold contracts to complete, well, anyone can do it, but particularly for silver and gold contracts, to complete some more advanced training that's available free of charge via the Government Commercial College. So that's for everyone. And then occasionally we get access to some more in-depth, deeper dive training. So that is put in place by the local partnerships. So when they get external grant funding, they will offer us up some places. So some of our contract managers have already completed that. And I'm hoping that we'll get access to some further places next year, so that people do get access to more training to support them with carrying out their role. And then in terms of data, the audit report last year identified some issues with the contract register. So that led to us identifying a gap in the procurement team where we needed someone to actually manage the data and ensure its accuracy. So as a result of that, we've appointed a BSO whose role is to ensure that the contract register is kept up to date, and now it's in a much better space, more accurate. We're now sharing it with SLTs to identify any gaps where we've got things missing, because it's only as good as what the procurement team are aware of. And then the next stage of that process is to try to map the contract register against spend data in SAP to look for levels of compliance. So that's the next stage of the process that we're hoping to start with the Data and Insight team after Christmas. Has anyone got any questions?
Andy?
Well, I mean, I thought it looked great. You know, I think the tiering structure is a fantastic idea, and it would be great to see it rolled out really quickly. So I suppose my first question is, how quickly do you think you can roll it out, and are we going to apply it to existing contracts, not just new contracts that are coming through?
The long-term ambition is to look at existing contracts. However, sometimes it might lead to increased specifications in line with contract management, so we need to apply it proportionately, because obviously that could create a lot of work in terms of contract modifications or variations. But that's the long-term aspiration to do that. In terms of rollout, all of the information is available on the intranet for anyone to access. We've published the information through email notifications, like news stream articles on the intranet. But like Sam said, the next stage of the process is to identify who are actually managing our contracts and see what support they need to make sure that they have got the skills and capacity to manage the contracts as they should be, or if not, consider what else we need to make sure that we do manage our contracts, because we need to ensure that we're getting value for money out of everything.
No, it makes sense. And my only other point was just a suggestion, really. So for the gold, or perhaps some of the silver ones, where the council's absolutely reliant on the delivery of services by third parties, and perhaps where they're handling really sensitive information, you know, data, personal information, some of the public. One of the things that I've seen elsewhere is the right to audit, so that we can go in as the council and make sure that they're operating appropriate controls on our behalf. And to make it just seemed to me that a lot of the gold standard stuff seemed to be reliant on suppliers self-reporting that they were doing the right things on our behalf and, you know, aligned to whatever the council has included in SLAs and the contract and things. But how do we know that they're doing it right? So, you know, that's something that's widely used really in other sectors and other, well, clients that I've seen in the past where I've been working alongside them. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. And I'll bring James in next.
Yeah, 2 points. My first one was similar to what you've just said there, which was that when I looked at sort of some of the contract management stuff and it's saying receive and assess regular reports and things like that, I'm wondering what those are and what assurance views are taking place, because, for example, if you've got somebody who's storing all of your child services records, then we need to do cybersecurity assurance, or have cybersecurity of that. If we're buying coffee off them, we probably don't need to worry about that. So I think linked to your kind of tiering system would then be, well, how much assurance is required for that level of provision? So that then means that actually if you've got a bronze level one, okay, you might need some assurance, but it's probably much more limited than for you guys. So I think adding that into the tiering would be useful around what assurance we'd expect. And I think the other thing linked to that was just around the contract managers. So again, I'm thinking that if you're managing a gold level supplier contract, that really needs to be something you're an SME, an expert on in terms of contract, my view would be. If you've got someone at the bronze level, then I think that's fine, potentially as a side of desk type of activity. But I would be concerned that if you've got a major contract provision and you've got someone trying to do that offside of desk and do all the assurance and manage all of that, that might not be possible. So I think how we build that into the tiering as well would be useful to think about who would do that sort of activity and whether it's done centrally or whether it's done in each individual part of the council.
Ruth, just before you respond, just to add to that, the other element I was thinking about that's along the similar themes, it's probably worth answering at the same time, is we ought to be able to map across between gold and silver to the risk registers to make sure that they're at the appropriate level as well, and that will give us a good reassurance also by looking at the risk registers, if we can say that, would pick up if there are any gaps. So if we've got something on the risk register that isn't gold, or vice versa, that's another way of helping you do that data piece about making sure that we've picked everything up. But if you just want to respond.
So in terms of mapping the gold and silver contracts, we are now keeping a record of the tiering on the contract register, so we do have that centrally, so it could be possible to do that, and I agree it's a good idea. In terms of data management, for all levels of contract, if a supplier is going to handle or process or store any personal data relating to one of our services, the service are required to undertake a data protection impact assessment, which will then feed into the contract terms and conditions to set out how we expect the supplier to deal with the data. And then on top of that, for a number of services that we procure, we do one step further, particularly in the if we're buying a system, so for example a system that will handle a lot of children's records, we do a technical due diligence on the supplier at the point that the contract's awarded, where IT look at the supplier in detail to confirm that where they're going to store our data is secure and it's in line with what we would expect them to do. So we put a technical specification out to make sure that our data is protected. And I believe that certainly for IT contracts, there is the right to audit already included in the contracts. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that was it, unless I've missed anything.
Rachel.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back on James's point about kind of the qualifications of a contract manager, because if you take one of the contracts that I have, for example, which is for the Healthy Child Programme, which is a multi-million-pound contract, which is about health visiting and school nursing. And what we found is that we actually do it more as a team, because you almost need an expert on contract management who knows what checks and balances need to be in place, what they need to update on how they do variations, but then you need a person or people who understand whether the quality and the delivery and the performance meet the outcomes that were in that specification. So we tend to find that we do it in a bit more, I mean, it will depend on the complexity of the contract, but I've got people within public health who understand what good looks like in that. But I've also got a contract manager who will make sure that everything is done correctly in terms of the ongoing management of that contract. And we tend to do that through a board with the provider that meets on a regular basis. So that's just a bit of an illustration of where, for some contracts, it works where you need more people than just one contract manager who can do all of those things, because sometimes the quality and what good is, particularly in a clinical service, isn't necessarily something a contract manager would know. So that's how we've done it in public health, but it will be different in different bits of the organisation.
James?
Yeah, I fully get that. What I'm thinking more is that you have, what I was thinking more of a contract manager is someone who pulls that all together and is accountable for actually doing that, because obviously I might be an expert in security or something like that, but I'm not going to check that unless somebody says that some assurance review needs a look at. So you need that person who was looking at, and what I'm getting at is that if you've got someone whose job is 90% something else and 10% doing that, they're going to have massive time constraints in terms of pulling that all together and getting that group of people together. But I appreciate it's not always that straightforward, because we've also got, you know, limited numbers of people, and it's not like we're working for an organisation where we have limitless money to spend on contract managers and whatever. So there's always going to be differences in that. But I just think that that's what I've seen before, is that things get missed where there's not somebody who's like has that accountability.
Anyone else wanting to come in? Well, just one couple from me. We talked about how we've cascaded and communicated this. You've also talked about having an awareness of this ongoing at SLTs. For those who don't know, that's senior leadership team within a directorate. Have we been to the SLTs and you've presented this, and this is what we're doing going forward? Because I'm hoping we did, but you didn't actually say that. So yeah, I'll take that as a yes.
Did, yeah.
So my final question is for Sam, really. So we've talked about this is work in progress, which is great. So you kind of know what's coming. So when would you like to come back to update us on how we're doing and what that is starting to look like?
I think we'd like to come back during 26-27 once we've had an opportunity to map the contract management resource and skills that we need, and to look at where we need more skills or appropriately placed roles. And because it will be 2 points, it will be establishing where we need them, establishing the funding for them, and being clear about what it is we need. And I think some time for this to bed in is helpful as well, because that will help us, because we'll start to see the emergence of any issues now that we've got the framework in place for those, particularly for those most high value contracts. So sometime in 26-27, the earlier part rather than later.
So and this will probably determine the date more than anything, but what I'd like to see is the piece of work we want to do around mapping to SAP.
Oh, yes.
You know, at least for the gold or gold and silver, you know, maybe we won't have done it all. And similarly, that piece of work about also looking across our risk profiles to make sure we've picked everything up from there.
Shall we give you,
back
before the end of the year, before the end of... My end of the year is March 20. I think of the year 25-26. So if we come back before the end of that to give you an update.
Well, I think we'll capture it, and we'll agree a date with you good selves at an appropriate time.
You an update.
If the committee's happy with that. So again, all we're doing today is noting that report, if the committee's comfortable with that. So thank you to Ruth and Sam. You can escape now, Ruth. Run. So we will now move to the next item, which is the half-yearly monitoring report on Treasury Management, which I am assuming James is doing as he's coming to the table. So over to you, James.
Morning. Thank you, Chair. Hi everyone, I'm James Anderson, Head of Accountancy. I'm sure I've met most of you before. So this is one of our annual reports on Treasury Management outturn for the 6 month up to September 25. So the report confirms that the Council operated within the strategy approved by Council earlier in March this year and has complied with its Treasury Management prudential indicators. The Treasury revenue budget is 36.1 million and is forecasted to outturn with an underspend of 1.8. It reflects higher levels of investment balances, resulting in an increased amount of investment income against expectations, and new borrowing taken at an average below the budgeted rate of 4.69. So 2 bits leading to that underspend. Higher investment balances and slightly better than budgeted borrowing. In terms of the investments, again, these are just some highlights really from the report. The investments averaged 98.9 million through the period. They were higher than normal cash balances at certain points, mainly due to the logo repayments of 30 million that we considered very likely to be called, but never ended up being so. And a large receipt of 24 million from the Combined Authority, which was received in April in advance of expenditure. Investments ranged from a peak of 139.2 million to a low of 58 million. The majority of those investment funds are placed in instant access, secure deposits such as money market funds and the DMO, which is part of HM Treasury, and LA, so local authority fixed term investments. So that's when we lend to other LAs, and likewise we borrow from them as well. There's also the average investment rate was 4.21% for the period, and we still have the 10 million invested in a CCLA property fund, which returned a net dividend yield of 3.86%. Within the report, there's also a bit of an economic summary, which is provided by our external advisors, Arlene Close. Just as a bit of a commentary on the economy for the period up to September. In terms of the borrowing activity, September, the Council's external borrowing has increased by 15.7 million to 789.9 million, shown in Table 2. There is 67.5 million of medium and long-term loans taken during the period, and we have repaid 51.9 million of medium and long-term loans. So that's as they become due, with a further 22.8 million to repay by the end of the financial year. We still have an increase in CFR, capital financing requirement, due to the capital programme, and as a result, an increased borrowing requirement. So there is a need for further borrowing in the rest of the year, and this will be taken evenly throughout the remaining months or when opportunities arise. So if we have any dips in the rate, etc., we'll take advantage of those. And that is pretty much it for a summary. So over to any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Andy?
I'll kick off again. I was just looking at Table 1, James, and I think the thing that stood out to me was the differences between the strategy estimate and revised forecast for borrowing, and where the borrowing was coming from between external and internal. So I suppose I was kind of wondering why there would be such a difference between the forecast and then actual. And then I suppose the sort of follow-on question is, well, what difference does it make? What's the impact for the council?
Good question. So the estimates in Table 1 are around the capital finance requirement, and so that is inherently affected by the capital plan as we present it, and probably historically we'll find that the outturn against capital expenditure isn't quite at the level of the plan, so that will inherently mean that the actual will highly likely to be less than the estimate. So we revise these estimates, but the estimates that we use every time will be the capital plan as we are setting it and looking forward. Say, internal to external, so that essentially is our reserves. So what we would do is we would not need to borrow if we are funding that borrowing by our reserves. So it's effectively balance sheet management, technical bit of treasury. And as your reserves deplete, your internal borrowing will deplete. You'll have to actually externalise some of that, so you'll be faced with sort of larger borrowing costs, etc. It probably doesn't matter a great deal. We do our treasury forecast and our cash forecast on a daily cash flow. So we'll always look at what's actually happening. We'll borrow when we need to borrow. So we'll run these. We've got a year's worth of daily ins and outs and cash planned at the start of the year. So we constantly monitor against that, see our cash position. And when we get to the point where we do need to borrow, then that's a conversation we have with our treasury advisors, where they'll scrutinise our workings and look at what we need to borrow, how much, and again then look at who we're going to lend from, which invariably will be PWLB.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I was just surprised because it sounds like you're really well controlled and managed, and the strategy said you were going to have internal borrowing of 344 million in it, and it kind of went down to 75. So is that because of a radical change in strategy through the year, or what's happened?
No, I think it just literally represents that it's effectively the balancing figure starting from the CFR. So as the CFR's higher, the external borrowing will be lower. So the internal borrowing is mostly reflecting just our assets, the top half of the balance sheet, if you like, in the accounting sense. So Rachel, do you want to come in as well?
I think you were looking at different years, Andy.
So I'm Rachel Firth, Finance Manager. That actual external borrowing line is actual. So that's assuming we're not taking any further borrowing towards the end of the year. And therefore that internal borrowing is sort of the difference. So that's just assuming that we don't take any. And that's the key there. I think that's why that makes it so high. That if we didn't take any borrowing, that would end up being our internal borrowing. That sort of makes sense. And the strategy estimate at January was set, like I say, back in January 25. So this revised forecast in September is based on the capital plan to the year end estimate now. Right. So that's where the differences lie there. Pardon?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the explanation. So yeah, that's helpful. And obviously you're comfortable with it. It seems like it's in line with your expectations. So yeah, thank you.
And there will always be that bias of it stems from borrowing requirements and CFRs, which is borrowing on the back of the plan. So that will we know that there is always that gap.
Yeah.
If you like.
Yeah.
And the need to borrow tends to be more born out of the cash position when it comes to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. We do as I say, James said earlier, we do monitor cash daily, and we do a yearly cash flow forecast. So we do what loans are due to be paid, what interest is due to be paid, what grants we're getting in. So we do, we've got our eye on the cash all the time. So
okay, right, thank you.
Members, any other questions? Yeah, man.
Yeah, hi there. Just one question looking at the council investments table, and you've got that split between different local authorities and some financial institutions, etc. And then looking at the interest rates that you get. I mean, I know they're all either AAA rated or, AA rated, and that's great. But why not just give all of it to the DMO so it's totally risk-free? And can you not do that?
We could, but we'd take a hit on the rate. So they're back to probably the same conversations that we have with Treasury advisors will be on the investment side as well. So we set this out and we look at money market funds, take that money and invest it in 20 different cash funds, and they have incredibly high credit ratings. And equally, they are, you get them back at an online banking sense. So it's really that thing of we'd always try to maximise what we've got, whilst maintaining liquidity and all the things that the SIPP code required. And we're certainly not out of kilter with what other LAs do and regionally what people are doing.
Yeah, I just thought, because there is some credit risk. I mean, there's, Deutsche Bank, Goldman Sachs could go bust. DMO can't go bust, and it costs you, 0.1%.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's finding that balance.
Yeah, okay.
And it does move, and we'll get daily emails from the Treasury advisors saying we're not happy with lending to this person for more than 30 days, or we're prepared for you to lend to them for half a year.
Right.
And it's very actively looked at. But again, it's finding the balance. It's a balance between risk and reward, if you like, and we are very prudent.
Okay.
A, as accountants, naturally, and B, with, well, we all remember Icelandic banks, don't we? Well, I'll show my age then, I do.
That's the whole point, yeah, exactly that.
And that's it, and all the standards that support the Treasury, Prudential Council, are all on the back of that, and nobody wanting to be back in that space. So we feel we're really prudent, and say it's a diversified portfolio and really heavily looked at and validated. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else wanting to come in, or are we content? Okay, so we just need to note the report, basically, if members are happy. Yep. Thank you, guys. You may escape. I think you guys going to come and join us for the external audit report. So I'm not sure who's leading off. We can just introduce yourselves. Gareth, yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. So Gareth Mills, Key Audit Partner at Grant Thornton, the Council's external auditors, joined by my colleague Greg Charnley, who's the Senior Manager for the audit. Chair, this is an update paper on the 24-25 external audit work at Kirklees. Just a few things, I suppose, to mention in the paper, some of which we did touch on in the pre-meet. So in terms of the accounts audit, the audit is nearing completion. There are a relatively small number of points still to resolve with the finance team. We have a meeting on Monday with James and Kevin to talk through those points. We expect them to be resolved in the near future. We expect to issue the ICE 260 report in draft to Kevin and James in the next couple of weeks, and obviously that will be finalised in the normal way and then presented to this committee at the end of January at the next meeting. Should all that go as I've just discussed there, that would mean that the Council would receive a full audit opinion on its 24-25 accounts, which I know we've touched on before, but that's a very positive place to be in given the state of the rest of, or the majority of the local authority external audit accounts market, where the proportion of local authorities subject to backstopped and disclaimed opinions is very significant. So the fact that you would continue to remain outside of that and subject to a full audit is a very positive outcome. So, the accounts audit is nearing completion. I think what I would say, Chair, is that the backstop deadlines are starting to move forward from next year. So for the year that we're discussing here, the backstop date is the end of February. Obviously, subject to finalising those points, we should be comfortably within time and presenting to this committee at the end of January. For the following year, the backstop comes forward a month to the end of January, and then the next 2 years after that, it comes forward again to the end of November, so within the same calendar year as to the year end to which the accounts relate. So I think one of the things we've been discussing with James and with Kevin is that once this year's signed off, I think myself, Greg, Kevin and James will have a a meeting between the four of us to run through what's gone well over the last couple of years on the audit, of which there's a great deal, what perhaps we can do differently on our side, James and Kevin on their side, so that essentially where we'd like to get to is using next year essentially as a dry run for the year after. So, you know, at this committee next year, trying to ensure that the ISA 260 and the VFM report come to this committee and that pretty much we're ready to sign at that point, because that would get us there 12 months ahead of the national deadline. So that's what we'll be looking to do, and liaising and working with finance colleagues on that. So that's the accounts audit. In terms of the VFM audit, that work is essentially concluded. We've issued a draft VFM report to senior management at the beginning of this week. We'll be discussing that over the coming weeks, again to finalise in time for January's committee. There are some ongoing issues that are flagged in that draft version, but given it's still in draft form, wouldn't wish to go into too much detail at this meeting, in fairness to management, who will obviously be coming back to us with their comments and responses on that draft report. But obviously you as members will see that full report at the end of January at the next meeting. So I think on the VFM side, it's positive that the work's pretty much been concluded in time for the end of November. Again, there'll be a little bit of movement that needs to happen over the next couple of years to make sure that plays through in terms of concluding things in full by the end of November, by 2027. But in essence, speaking to our VFM colleagues who've led the majority of that work, they've certainly had a high degree of engagement from relevant council officers, and that's not just with finance. The VFM obviously looks more widely, so Sam and other colleagues in procurement and contract management have fed into that as well as others as well. So thank you for that. I think that was probably all I was planning to say, Chair. As I say, VFM pretty much done. Report coming in January. Accounts broadly there. A few points to discuss over the next couple of weeks, starting on Monday with James and Kevin, but should be there in time for January's committee date, with that view that we'll be working with finance colleagues to slightly bring things forward over the next year or so to meet that November 27 deadline that we will all be working to. So I'll pause at that point, Chair, but obviously happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Gareth. And that does give us some reassurance that we're on track for our January meeting. The fact that you've largely concluded your investigations and work, and now it's the finalising, crossing the T's and dotting the I's and getting that agreement is a really good position for us to be in. So thank you to you guys and to everyone on the council side that's been involved in getting us to that position, really. But I'll just open it up to members, if members have any questions or anything they're wishing to ask. That looks like a no.
If I just could on that, Chair, I mean, I agree with you, and compared to the vast majority of other local authorities, we are in a good position here at Kirklees. I think both James and Kevin and myself and Greg would probably agree that we probably should be a little bit ahead of where we probably are at the minute, which, it's not going to be a massive step change at Kirklees to get everything concluded by the end of November, compared to the vast majority of other local authorities. But there will be things that, both sides can probably take on board from the last couple of years that means that we are really in that strong position this time next year, sort of 12 months ahead of when we actually need to sign off by the end of November, that we effectively do next year as a dry run for that. And that's very much, I know Greg and James has had discussions on that, and myself and Kevin as well, that's what both sides will really be keen to work towards for this time next year.
That's brilliant. I'm just looking at members. I think we're just required to note Gareth's report. Members comfortable with noting the report? Yeah, and look forward to hearing from you again next meeting.
That's our key one of the year, so yes, we'll look forward to that.
Thank you. So we're now going to move on to the risk management update. If you wouldn't mind just introducing yourselves, and then over to you.
Hello, Alice Carruthers, Senior Risk Officer.
Martin Durnley, Head of Risk. So this is our annual report to the committee on the progress and procedures that the council follows to undertake risk management. This is about our process and systems, not about the actual risks themselves per se. So what we've brought you here today is a report about what we've been up to over the last year and how good or otherwise we think the council is in general in doing its risk management process. So I'm not going to talk in detail because my colleague knows far more about this than I do.
This is, as Martin says, it's risk management update. It's in effect the annual report. We last brought a report here in February of this year, so it covers about 9 months. The key message within it is that we maintain focus on risk management across the council, ensuring that processes and governance are embedded in routine management activities and not addressing risk management in isolation. And I think we've already had conversations today about complaints and about contract management, where we see how they are interrelated. So we're making sure that we're not looking at risk management as a silo activity, but it is it's weaved across the other governance that is in place. The report that you've got in front of you is structured to include a summary of kind of the reporting and governance arrangements, but it also bears in mind there's additional detail provided in the second paper on risk assurance, so we've attempted not to duplicate between the two. Fundamentally, the risk management process is reliant on service level risk registers being comprehensive, accurate and well maintained and up to date. Because it's these that escalate up to the corporate risk report. So they're very much the building blocks of what we look at corporately. The report includes within it a heat map representation of change in the distribution of our corporate risks, a list of our corporate risks and their latest scores, and a summary of key changes. And just worth noting at this point that the paper is providing an update on the system and the controls that we have in place for identifying, managing and monitoring risk, and not the specific scores that have been previously agreed. The paper also talks about the risk assurance review process. So that has involved myself and Martin and others meeting individually with risk owners to provide challenge and scrutiny with a focus on scoring of risks, the control effectiveness and the action delivery as well. So we've completed that for all of our red rated risks. We're underway with our amber rated risks and on track to complete all of them by the end of the municipal year, not this year. And I think I'm starting to think now, how do we formalise that process for 26-27? So how do we make sure we can report kind of more formally on the output of that process? Because I think it warrants that in terms of the conversations that we've had. The report also provides an update on the progress that has been made on introducing risk appetite as part of the risk management framework for Kirklees Council. And just reiterates the position that risk appetite would be used as a strategic tool to help guide the organisation in determining how much risk it is willing to take. It would be a guidance document, it wouldn't be rules, it would understand that decisions outside of risk appetite are completely possible, but they would be made deliberately and the implications of those would be understood. The paper also touches on some of the broader organisational learning and culture focus that we've had in place. So we've made specific progress in terms of developing some e-learning modules which are available for all staff to undertake, making sure that we've got reference material available on the intranet in one place that is easy for people to access and refer to. And making sure newly appointed or new to council heads of service and service directors have the right level of engagement and understanding of what the requirements are in terms of risk management. But equally important is the embedding of risk management across our other management processes. So we've seen the introduction of check and challenge process, and that's got risk very much within the kind of balanced scorecard approach that takes, and recognises that interrelated position of it. And then there's just a mention of the increased coordination that risk managers are undertaking at a West Yorkshire level, so at a regional level, looking at where we can share best practice, discuss emerging risks that maybe that we can learn from, some benchmarking activity and value that can bring, and also starting to investigate opportunities for kind of peer review and challenge in terms of the different ways that we do things. So looking to kind of drive that forward. And other actions that are just listed within there where we want to progress in the next year. So being more robust around the assurance across stated controls. So I think it's very easy for risk owners to inform us about controls, and we just need to work robustly to make sure that we've got evidence that they are working as designed. And obviously I work closely with the internal audit team, and that's something that they look at if they've got relevant audits that are looking in that space. But we need to keep challenging in that space, and that's recognised. We are considering development of risk reporting at kind of a principal risk level, so a risk category level, so we can really start to see some of those thematic areas of either concern or otherwise. And we'll undertake a review of our risk assessment matrix, so that's kind of the 5x5 grid, and the triggers and the parameters that sit within that to make sure that's still working for the organisation. And we don't need to kind of review the guidance that sits alongside that. That's all for this one, thank you.
Alice, that's just brilliant. I love this report, and I love the work that you've done over the last couple of years, and the way it shows pictorially that risk, the target, where we're moving, and how you can understand it. It's so good from my point of view. But before I go on, I'll bring members in. I think Andy was indicating first.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really useful, it's a mine of information in here. There's lots to go through, right? I suppose I was interested in the risk appetite piece, so that's sort of moving this on a bit, isn't it? So is it right to say that it's really the service directors who've looked at the target risk that you're aiming for at the moment? Is that what you were suggesting? Because where I've seen this work well elsewhere, it's been sort of the board of companies that have looked at this in workshops and said, look, we're happy that these are the target levels of risk that we're happy to take as an organisation. And I think that's important, you know, from what I've seen elsewhere. So just interested to understand how the risk appetite piece will work for you.
I think initially we undertook a series of, we had sessions with various service directors, you know, at that level to talk to them about the risks, the risk appetite. It was interesting to get their views, not necessarily on their what they think of as their risks, so to make sure that we encourage them to talk about risks that they wouldn't necessarily be consulted on, but what was their view there. So we undertook that, and then we have taken the kind of the proposal that's come together through up to ELT level, so it's been to kind of executive officer level.
Yeah, no, that's good. And so it's just a follow-on question just on some of the details. So Risk Dev 03 seems to be the one that's all about the development, the big capital programmes across the council. And we know that there's a lot of money being spent on those over the next few years, so it's really important that those deliver. So I suppose I was just slightly surprised that there was no mention of independent programme assurance on that risk in terms of one of the controls. There is mention, I think, of internal audit doing some work in that space, but I know we've heard before from you, Martin, around the capacity of internal audit, and I'm not sure that would really sort of address all the assurance that we might expect to see in that space.
I think that's a fair point. I think the organisation hasn't historically had a lot of independent project assurance on complex projects. I'm not off. I mean, internal audit would probably look at the principles of it, but probably wouldn't want to do it, wouldn't be careful of doing it in some instances, because sometimes the project assurance will only come from reasonable experts. I think there are some areas where we've got wider, you know, the cultural heart has a wider infrastructure of it has a formal project manager who should be providing at least some degree of project assurance from over the contractor and the architect, etc. That's probably the biggest one where we have some. I think it is worth considering that as a separate control, because I think you're right that in many private organisations or some large public sector ones, they would have some degree of independent control assurance. I think it's balancing cost to value, but I think sometimes the council's project delivery might be improved if there was that type of arrangement in place.
Well, I mean, certainly what I've seen is where it's difficult, complex, strategically important, you would have a specific budget, 5% so the project or the programme cost for assurance type activities, just to make sure that that sort of second pair of eyes is on it. You know, if there are any particular issues, they're spotted early, rather than, you know, money going down the drain, which can happen on some of these large projects and programmes.
So just on that, I think what it may be worth us doing is perhaps asking at our next meeting, well, I'm guessing it would be David Wildman as the service director, that perhaps if we could ask David to come along and just explore that risk with us and explain what they are doing to make sure that we do have the right level of assurance and oversight independently, given the size of the financial risk to the organisation. So I think we can probably capture that as a request. And we'll pick that up through Nicola to make that request to David.
So Chair, I think, yeah, that's fine. There are obviously some projects like IT projects that wouldn't be covered by David, but I think at the moment, if your perception is that the biggest risk comes from sort of the development projects, then I think that's a legitimate to invite David, so yes.
Well, yeah, I'm saying that because that's what the risk talks about. So. Sorry, did anybody else? James?
Yeah, so two things. So first, I'd agree with what was said about the presentation, and helps us to understand that my reading of it is that majority of our risks are had been on a downward trajectory from the previous year. There's a couple, some of them are kind of similar, but generally we're not, you know, that gives us some confidence in terms of the way we're going. The thing I just wanted to check on was this risk appetite stuff. I get what we're trying to achieve, but when I'm looking at it, I'm a bit confused by some of it. So, for example, we've got an environmental sustainability, says this is the risk relating to the environmental consequences of delivering core council services, right? And then we say we're open. That appears like we're saying, well, you know, if there's a bit of sewage spillage, never mind. Do you know what I mean? I don't think that is what we mean. I think what we mean is that we want to trial things, for example, that may or may not be successful, but and similarly, like, you know, we're just talking about third party, well, that also says open. Well, actually, we've just had a discussion about how we need to enhance controls on contract management. So I'm just questioning that it's more to do, I guess, with the definition of what the risk eagerness is. That I think you could view that as being, we've got an openness to not be concerned about environmental matters or about management of suppliers and contracts. So maybe it's just the way it's positioned, but I think maybe it could be positioned a little bit differently, or maybe actually we don't need as many risk appetite themes, if that makes sense. I'm not sure, but yeah, that would be my only feedback on that.
So you're absolutely right. We had a big dilemma about that because, as you know, the organisation is often somewhat risk appetite, particularly has a very negative risk appetite on it, or a very low risk appetite on things that are compliance related. So we wanted to avoid the situation where anyone was using, we must comply as their reasons for not doing anything. So that sort of does go higher than any of the other things. So when you mentioned the minor sewage spill doesn't really matter. Well, it does, because that's about legal compliance. But once you've come within the zone of once you've got the compliance part there, what we're saying is you might be rather more open in your approach to how you deal with certain topics and issues. So yes, but you're right, it was a dilemma that we faced when we were thinking about this. So it's right, but the organisation has to understand what that means, because it's a very valid observation.
Caroline?
I just want to ask, there are two in particular that sort of stuck out to me. Contract management and DO3, where there's such a huge mismatch between your target and what it seems to be is going the other way. So the risk management's increasing as opposed to hitting the target, which is a lot lower. So is that because of economic situation, or is it things that are going wrong? Why is there such a difference?
I think that that's a perception about the fact that some things haven't been going as well as they possibly could, but is one that is relatively solvable for the types of reasons that Sam was talking about earlier. So once we implement the better contract management arrangements, which were raised by the Friends in external audit last year, and possibly the year before as well. So once we've implemented those type of controls and bringing more information to this committee, among other things, we think that that will improve the level at which that control is there. So it's the one with it's got a lot of scope to move. Is that a fair comment, Alice?
Yeah.
I think that's why we're there, isn't it?
I think it's one that is, which is more within our control than some of the risks, where they're much more influenced by the external environment or you know, third parties. Whereas this one feels like we have got we've got the scope to manage that risk down effectively. And what was the other one you mentioned?
It's DO3. They're the two biggest ones where there's the mismatch between your target and what is actually happening. If you look at
yeah.
So they're in the same quarter actually. You've got 2-2 for both of those two, and yet you're right, they're going the wrong way. They're going up, not down. Going the other way. It'd be nice to see them coming down towards your targets as opposed to going higher.
So one thing I picked up, and I apologise for not picking this up in the briefing, to be honest, Alice, but when you look at the actual report itself, so not the presentation, climate change, it suggests it's got worse. So it was at 12 and it's now at 16. But in the presentation, it's 16. It's not moved. So I'm not sure whether it has changed or it hasn't. But there's an inconsistency, put it that way.
It's a technical answer to that, really.
Yes, that will be a timing issue in terms of the yes, it's an error in my part.
And I apologise, I should have picked that up in the...
Well, it shouldn't be in there.
Should have picked it up in the briefing, because we would have... Because somebody looking at this externally beyond doesn't make sense.
So there is a sort of explanation, which is that there is a concern that the council hasn't necessarily had as many resources in trying to deliver climate change related projects.
I think that's in the explanation.
Yeah.
I'm not questioning the scoring at all. I'm just saying we've got an inconsistency between the two places it appears in the report and the presentation, which I apologise not picking up when we went through the briefing. Any more from members? So on this one, we just really need to note the report and thank officers for producing it. If everybody's comfortable with that. Okay. And we're happy with the approach to the risk appetite and the framework as that goes forward. But again, that's work in progress, I guess. Yep. Thank you very much for the report. I think we're then going to do the risk assurance piece that we've been looking forward to for a while. And I'll go back to you, Alice.
Yes, so this was originally timetabled to come to the September meeting. But we're here, so you've got a double whammy of risk. It was requested from the chair of the audit committee just to really provide some more kind of demonstrate the workings of the risk management approach and to be able to see it in operation, so you can actually determine kind of the adequacy of what we're telling you the theory of. So we've undertaken a case study route. We selected a service risk register, which was highways, and we selected one of the corporate risks that are included in the corporate risk report, and this was the community cohesion risk. These were both selected randomly, so not necessarily best practice, not necessarily areas where we have specific concerns. So the paper focuses on the kind of the governance and the process of risk management activities, providing assurance around kind of the risk management cycle. So how are they identified? How do we assess risks? How do we monitor and manage those and ensure that they are being tabled and escalated at appropriate levels? What the paper doesn't seek to do is kind of examine in detail the specific risk registers or risk reports, so not the content or challenge those risks. It's just giving you the assurance that the process is designed to make sure those conversations happen at the appropriate level. So it's kind of important that the appendices that are provided give thanks to the authors of those in the Highway Service and Community Service, because they have they've produced and drafted those under some steer and guidance. The Highways report, the key points from that, it demonstrates kind of a broadly stable number of risks at the low 20s, which is a number that at service level is manageable, is not excessive, but it's not super low, and movement within that number. So we'd expect to see that fluctuate, but not wildly. Demonstrates broad coverage of different risk types in there, and scores that reflect the risk level, and they're not all kind of artificially high or low. So we're always, thinking about if people are kind of increasing scores in an attempt to game the system in some way, or lower scores in an attempt to, cover up a risk that ought to be escalated. There's one risk that they go into detail on, so a capital delivery programme, kind of the management of the capital programme. So there's 11 actions that were identified there. This is obviously a long-standing risk, and 6 of those are now kind of working as embedded controls. So the actions start off, we need to develop this process, or we need to introduce a new report. So they're now kind of working on a regular basis. So we would assess those as embedded controls. And 4 further actions that are underway, kind of with due dates up until March 2027. So there's obviously kind of ongoing, enduring work there to manage that risk. In terms of the community and cohesion, well-being and resilience, so this is one of our corporate risks that are included within here. So this talks about the process. This will be within the community services risk register. This will be a number of risks listed within there, but they come together, so we amalgamate those and say at a corporate level, this is the risk that we're managing. The risk is largely externally driven, so in contrast to some of the other corporate level risks that we manage. So the controls and actions are very much identified and implemented through a multi-agency approach. So the community service provide that strategic leadership across the council and across partners. So the governance involves both council officers and also statutory partners. So it's something that kind of reads, across that risk consistently. The risk score kind of reflects the national terrorism threat level. If there have been significant incidents, both within and external to Kirklees, intelligence that will be shared at tension monitoring and community partnership meetings, and just reflects the fact that while the risk is very much externally influenced, the impact is well controlled through kind of the proactive engagement, partnership coordination that we have in place, and a very resilient response framework that can shift our response from something that takes place on a weekly to a daily to an hourly approach, and can adapt as required. The paper then goes on to outline kind of the operation of the listed controls and assesses their effectiveness, which is something that we are driving risk owners to do, to say you might have a control, but can you attest to the fact that it's working as it's designed to as well. So we've got them to undertake that activity, and then summarises progress on the further actions that have been identified to further reduce the impact of this risk. Thank you.
Thank you. It's almost a bit ironic that Kath's had to nip out to take a call, because this is the issue that she's probably talked about almost as long as I've been sat on this committee, which is how do we, as an audit committee, assure ourselves that risks are being properly managed without getting involved in the risks. And this is an attempt to address that. So what we've got here is some remarkably detailed information on 2 randomly selected, when we randomly selected these risks, I think the first one we came out with was corporate governance, corporate one, which we decided was probably the least appropriate for us to look at. But we have got two very, very different risks, and one that is purely internally focused, almost from highways, and then one that is very much dependent on that broader partnership. So I think by accident, because we didn't do it,
it was genuinely random.
Yeah, it was, and they've come out really, really well. So I mean, I just think this gives me that reassurance that I'm looking for, and I was reflecting when I had after I'd had the briefing. Oh, speak of the devil.
Have you all finished?
No, we're literally just talking about the two risks that we're looking at in more detail.
Oh.
So how we decided to I was saying it was ironic that we get to this as you weren't here, given this is something we've talked about a lot. I was reflecting after the briefing of, you'll recall, well, most you probably recall, the dreadful incident that almost happened around the corner here, where that young lad was killed, and how this is how we responded to that incident. You know, it almost does bring it to life in one sense, horrible way, but yeah. But anyway, I'll open it up. So all you've missed, Kath, Alice has just talked us through the two risks, the highways and the community cohesion. And it's really an opportunity for us to...
Right, I'll whiz to the right. What page?
Microphone. About 180.
Yeah. 180.
So whilst Kath's just finding her place, did anybody else have any questions? Andy, if you want to start us.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought it was really useful to illustrate how, you know, people are actually implementing risk management across the organisation. What it did for me is it highlighted some differences, and it sounds like you're on a bit of a journey, particularly that piece that you mentioned, Alice, about the self-assessment of control effectiveness and design. And I thought, actually, if you can get management to think about risk in that way and do that kind of self-assessment, that would be really helpful. So that was fantastic. And when I was an auditor, yeah, I would absolutely love it if management had done that, because I would focus then on the controls that they thought were working well. You know, it sounds a bit topsy-turvy, but to make sure that actually they were working well and they could rely on them in the way that they were suggesting they would. So I thought that was just, you know, really helpful. But perhaps just the point that I'm making is to get everybody on the same page in terms of that consistency would be really helpful.
Yeah,
I cannot disagree with
I think as the chair said, it was chosen randomly, but these two, I mean, I was quite pleasantly surprised how successful the exercise was and how carefully the services thought about, or the two services that we talked to, or Alice talked to, responded to the topics that we'd raised. So it didn't look, we didn't feel we were just being given something that they thought we wanted to hear. I think it was a genuine...
I think they found the process very helpful and actually welcomed it, because when you do get a bit more under the bonnet and you are challenging, it does make you think. So I think it's
I think also, again, by accident, we've picked two risks that it's very easy for us as members to resonate with, because they are things that we are close to and we'll deal with on a regular basis. So we could have ended up with one that perhaps members wouldn't have come into much contact with, but just by that randomness. But yeah. Yeah, Nick.
Sorry, so thinking about that, is it worth, or have you sent those to all the other ones that you didn't choose at random to say you might be picked at random at some point, so it's worth starting to think like this?
I think what we have our quarterly risk management group meeting, so we'll be meeting, our Q3 meeting is early in January, so I think certainly we'll give some feedback then, kind of following this meeting, to say that this is the process that we went through. And I think we need to think about, as I was saying, the risk assurance kind of reviews that we've done on our corporate risks, think about how do we mirror, kind of mix those two processes together, because I wouldn't want to do both, but I think we need to take the best of both approaches to to get the right outcomes for us.
I think one thing to think about is if we have risks on the corporate register that just never move. So we have the same level of risk and we have the same actions time and time again. maybe doing a bit more in-depth dive like this on those might surface some of the things that could be done or ways of perhaps changing that risk, because you do tend to get that, and I saw that in my previous role in banking, where you had risks that were there forever and never seemed to change, and you're kind of going, well, are we just going through the process here? Is anybody doing any real thinking about this particular risk? So it might be useful longer term in that sense as well.
I think that's fair, Chair. Well, that is one of the things we've been trying to do when we've been going through each of the individual risk lines to see where they are, because we have revised one or two of them to reflect that, you know, is this really a control, etc.
James?
Yeah, just the same point really. It's I'm not focusing too much on these specific ones, but I do think there's something there around, okay, so we've got controls embedded, but are they actually, how do we know they're the right controls? And how is that reflecting in the risk profile? Because I think, for example, if you're thinking about community safety, I've had conversations quite a lot of times in the council around, oh, councillor, violent crime in your area has gone down this month. Well, so what, do we know why? Is there a reason? Like, is it because of controls? Is it a control we've put in? Or, I mean, sometimes in community safety it's a really difficult one because it's totally factors outside of our control. But do you know what I mean? Is it because our control worked, and in which case maybe we should do more of that and less of something else? I think sometimes we don't always get to that. So that would be where it's, but I mean, I suppose when we're looking at it holistically, if we're looking at a downward trend of our risk scores, that should tell us that is working. So I guess that's the way that we'd look at it. But that would be my own reflection on here is there anything that specifically says, yeah, this action or control was really successful or not successful? That might be and some sort of indicators around that might be useful.
And I think, Kath, did you want to come in?
Yeah, so I apologise for missing the first bit. One of the probably increasing issues that I think we need to think about, and you probably have, is as WICA takes on more responsibility and has more funding for making decisions that affect Kirklees, where do the responsibilities lie in the risk management of that? I have a particular project in mind, which on all these scores would go. And it seemed to me that part of it was a decision being made at WICA, having to be implemented locally, and maybe, I don't know, it seems to me that some things have fallen through the gap, and I wonder what thinking has been done around what is going to be a growing situation.
I think it's a good point. I think my equivalent at WICA has joined our West Yorkshire risk managers group, which I think is a positive step forward. So we can have those same conversations. And I know that there's lots of work in terms of the risk management space that the combined authority are progressing in terms of changing their approach to their reporting. I think on a more kind of operational project by project basis, I think it's something that we can certainly look at in the kind of the Dev 03 space as well, because those combined authority funded projects would sit within that risk that we spoke about. So I think we can look at kind of the risk management reporting. How do we report the risk to through our own kind of reporting mechanisms, and how is that reported to WICA, and making sure that we're getting the consistent story, to both parties, and it's going to the right place.
Yeah.
I think also, Chair, if you want to, it might be worth discussing that with David Wellman.
Yeah.
Yeah, because obviously most of David's projects are heavily funded by WICA. So, yeah.
And it's where the decision making is. It seems to me that, from what I can pick up, decisions are made at the WICA level for funding that's rightly come from government to WICA. But then the implementation stage is largely in the local council involved. And that is, I think, creates difficulties that need to be thought through. I'm sure they can be resolved. I'm not sure currently that they have been.
Yeah, I'm guessing that one's more about, do we have the right risks, which is probably a scrutiny function rather than our function, isn't it? Because I think what we're picking up there is where does that ownership sit? And that's probably something for the scrutiny panel to think about. But I'll bring James in. Sorry.
I was only going to say that I'm on the audit committee at WICA now, and I think from my experience so far on it, they're definitely less well advanced in terms of risk management, and it is useful to see some of the things that we've done that I can then take there, because I think they're in a similar position that we were a while back, where you're seeing risks and going, well, why is this audit action not being completed, and that sort of stuff, and moving to that point of saying, right, we need more scrutiny on that, and bringing people to meetings, changing that culture of people not thinking that an audit action is something that they can just leave on the back burner. So yeah, I think there is, I don't know the exact connection on the point here, but definitely I think there's more to, yeah, there's definitely work needed there to link things together, and it's good if everybody's working collaboratively on that.
Thank you. Any more on this, or are we happy to note that report? Yep. Okay, thank you. We're sticking with you, Martin, I think. So it's our Q2 report.
Thanks, Chair. So this is the Quarter 2 report. So it's got a couple of components. There's the sort of cover reports. There's the report that details the sort of general audit work carried out in the quarter. There's a short private appendix, which we'll have to discuss in private session. And then there is a summary of progress against recommendations. So still a little bit less work than perhaps we'd like to do, though I think we're still hopeful that we're on target for completion of the plan agreed at the last meeting, the September meeting. And so the report contains the information about where we've got to on the individual reports. What we also have on here is a little paper that addresses something that the committee asked for back in June, and has some, and you might want to have a think about that, and a little bit of information about fraud progress. In relation to the recommendations, I think things have improved a tiny bit. There are a bit more progress on quite a lot of recommendations, so there are nowhere near as many recommendations outstanding as there were at the beginning of the year. Part of that is because one project within adult services has made an awful lot of progress and has got a new project manager and is actually in the process of being fulfilled, so that will take out quite a lot of the recommendations that have been left for some time. So that's positive. The general level of assurance is about at the level we would expect, so not too bad. And I think that's probably all I want to say really for the moment, Chair, if that's okay.
Thanks, Martin. I'll open it up to members. Andy, if you want to kick off.
Yeah, I was just looking on page 200 or page 10 of the report, and it mentions the ERP implementation seems to be at a fairly early stage. But I just wondered if that's something that we could ask David to pick up on, what assurance is planned over the ERP implementation. I know elsewhere ERP implementations have been very problematic for local authorities.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not quite sure.
Andy's inbox.
It's sort of nominally Andy or maybe James, if he was still here, would be able to answer that a bit more. But yeah, we're a little bit involved. But no, if you want, it is making some progress. It's on quite a long term, and it is Andy's team, as the chair says, that is meant to be taking the lead. It's a transformation project, really. So whether you want to actually want more information about that, I guess, because it's a core risk, isn't it? So if you want that for the next meeting, we can more than do that, Chair, but yeah.
So I'm just going to look at Rachel, actually. So is this something that we should ask Andy, or who would be the right person to come and talk to us about that procurement of the ERP system?
So I suppose it depends on which bit of it. So at the moment, it's being managed as a transformation programme. So obviously it's part of our suite of transformation activity, a bit like the contract management one. So I think it's not unreasonable to bring something here just to kind of give you assurance around the governance and the risk in relation to it. I think obviously Cabinet and scrutiny will oversee whether we're delivering or not, but in terms of understanding from a risk perspective, I think that's absolutely fine. We can bring that here.
And who would that be that would bring that? Is that just somebody in Andy's team? Is that Andy, or is it in a different...
I think it would probably be Andy himself, actually, but I will check for you.
Okay, so if committee are comfortable, we'll ask through Rachel that Andy comes to a subsequent meeting to just give us a bit of a reassurance around how we're managing that programme and the risks that that could create. Okay?
Sorry, one more quick question. Just interested in the follow-up of the recommendations. Yeah. Obviously, it starts in 2024-25, Martin, so I just wondered, what about the ones before that? Do we track those, or do we take it that they're all implemented and sorted?
I think we're broadly content that the
So I think you know where I'm going at, Martin. So if we have, I mean, from what I've heard is we don't know whether all the old recommendations have been actioned or not. And that isn't a comfortable place for me to be in terms of seeking reassurance that we're following through on internal audit action. So I do think we need a piece of work to go, let's look back at any and see if there are any outstanding and add them to this report.
yeah, I mean, I think we can have a go at that. I'm pretty sure that the answer is not very many, but we will just check, yes.
Not very many is some.
No, okay.
Sorry, did anyone else want to come in? James?
Just a really quick question. At the end of the appendix, it says waste management contract, and it says post to achieve new arrangements being recruited. So can I just check what that means? So they've recruited somebody to deal with the contractual negotiations, and what was the actual action required there?
It was to basically improve the level of commerciality.
Okay, so it's to improve the commercial. So that's somebody literally just coming to look at the negotiations as opposed to... Okay, thank you.
So I think the person's in place.
Yeah, I think we could start develop. Well, there's we won't mention names because but there is an officer who's the principal leader of this. But I think this was meant to.
And I only say that because I did the Suez Kirklees recycling board earlier this week, and the gentleman was there, and we were talking about the contract arrangements as part of that. So I think they are in place already. But the contract hasn't gone out to tender yet. It's not going out to tender till February. Any more from any other members? Or are we content to note the report? Okay. We only have two things left. So just a quick look at the agenda for our January meeting, which will be quite a full meeting. But that's just for information, really. And then it was just to ask you all to let me know before you leave the room whether you're able to make the 12th of December for that training or not, because we'll need to make a call on whether we carry that training out or not on the 12th of December. And I think that's it from me. So thank you all, officers and members.
We've got the private.
Oh, sorry, apologies. Right, I'm going to move us into the private meeting.